I asked the group, a bunch of seasoned CEOs that had owned their businesses for, a lot of them for decades. I was like, well, how do you guys work to get out of the weeds? And one of the guys was like, you can never get out of the weeds, Bob. You have to be in the weeds as the business owner. And in my mind, I was like, I've seen plenty of businesses that don't run that way, and that is not for me. There is a way to do that.
Welcome, Bob. Glad you could join Jeff and I today. Appreciate you carving out some time to talk through your experience today. Would love to just sort of maybe open things up by just having you share your name, sort of your role, and a little bit about your company and what it is that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Jeff, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Bob Larkin. I am the owner, president of Treatment Technology. I bought this company about 3.5 years ago now, and came out of a career of commercial corporate banking and just needed to do something else. And so I'm one of the searchers that found a business to buy and then acquired it. And so when I bought the company, Treatment Technology had 4 employees, and today we have 14 and a handful of fractional part-time workers. So we've scaled pretty significantly over the last couple of years. But what we do is we provide clean water for life, and we provide treatment chemicals to water and wastewater districts throughout Colorado. So a lot of that is chlorination, and then there's a lot of other processes in water and wastewater treatment to get your water clean to get to your homes, or for swimming pools to swim in recreationally. And then also on the wastewater side, every time you run the sink and or flush the toilet, it's got to get treated somewhere. And so we are part of the supply chain that gets those chemicals to mid and small size municipalities all throughout Colorado. So we've got drivers, warehouse people, trucks that are delivering liquid, mostly in drums and totes, and we pump product around the state. So we're an important part to the livelihood of just about everybody. If you've been in Colorado for any portion of time, you have touched or utilized water and or wastewater that we've impacted. A lot of different places, recreational places, towns and municipalities utilize us.
Talk to me a little bit. That's a big change, right? I guess corporate banking, finance to treatment tech. So tell me about what did that look like as you were walking through that transition, and what did a typical week look like for you as you sort of made that transition?
Yeah, it was a big leap. It was a lot different from what I was doing. I was working in very white collar, 1%er kind of world, CEOs, CFOs, owners of companies, and then moved into a very blue collar business where we actually move things, pump product, move drums and totes, drove trucks, all that kind of stuff. And I was doing a lot of high level office work, meetings, coffees. For years, I wore a suit and tie, and then business world kind of became more casual over time to a place where I was wearing Carhartts and helping out in the warehouse. And when I first bought the business, it was small. There were 2 other office workers, 2 drivers, and myself, and I was doing just about everything. Those first couple of weeks, I was putting in 80-hour weeks easily, just trying to learn and understand the business that I had bought, all the nuances. Becoming a new owner, there's a lot of things to set up, bank accounts, HR tools, all of that. And so I was wearing all the hats and just a lot of heavy lifting to understand my business, and then also figure out where do you grow, scale, improve, and over time try to get out of the weeds.
All right, Bob. So we've been working together for a few years. Let's go back in time, though, to that first year. I think we started working together about a year in. Is that correct?
Yeah, just about a year in. I think it's probably right around my first anniversary where we started even exploring what that could look like.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so take us to the stage of the business you're in after a year in, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what were the maybe tension points you were experiencing I'm a year in, here's my team. What does it look like for us to grow?
Yeah, I think at that point, I wasn't fighting fires constantly. I still wore a lot of hats. We were starting to grow a little bit on the revenue side, but I found that I was still in the weeds a lot. I remember during that period, I was looking I had searched out a bunch of CEO groups during that period, trying to find peers and people to learn from. And I have a pretty good network, and there's a lot of people that I reached out to and asked for advice on various things. But I remember that during that period, I just wasn't quite there. There were too many things on my plate in order to work on the business and not in the business. A lot of the things were taking up my time in the business that were preventing me from going out and driving sales and or building strategic operating structures for the business.
Walk us through some of those first interactions, and we thought maybe working together could make sense both on my side, but as well as on your side. Like what was the problem that I could potentially solve that you were experiencing at that stage of the business?
Yeah, I think at that time, I knew what I wanted to do with my business. I didn't want to be doing the HR stuff. I didn't want to be paying all the bills. I didn't want to be dealing with all the aspects. I wanted to drive strategy, some operations, and then drive culture. In fact, the longer story is at the banks that I was working at, I wasn't going to get an opportunity to impact strategy and or culture, right? I worked at some of the really big banks, and unless I was going to get to the C-suite and move to New York or Charlotte, that just wasn't going to happen for me. And that's why I bought a business, but I still wasn't getting to do some of those things when I had all the hats. And so I needed to figure out and offload and outsource a number of those components in order to get to that place. I remember one of the CEO groups that I was in, towards the end of the session, I asked the group, a bunch of seasoned CEOs that had owned their businesses for a lot of them for decades. I was like, well, how do you guys work to get out of the weeds? And one of the guys was like, you can never get out of the weeds, Bob. You have to be in the weeds as the business owner. And in my mind, I was like, I've seen plenty of businesses that don't run that way, and that is not for me. There is a way to do that. And I quickly found that wasn't the group for me from a peer's perspective. But in our conversations, I think Jeff was, trying to figure out what was next for him. And so we were chatting probably a little bit more frequently. He was helping me, think strategically on how do I do that? And I think it was Jeff that said, Bob, I've got some capacity. Look, it sounds like you've got some challenges in these areas, and I'd be happy to take those off your plate. And so that's kind of how our working relationship at Treatment Tech started. I said, yeah, I've got some cash available. I'm not sure I'm ready to hire an operations manager or somebody full-time, but what does this look like for you to take a handful of projects off my plate to free me up to do some of the more strategic things and or drive sales and do what I want to be doing? So that's
Yeah,
kind of how that started.
great. Yeah, and on my side, it was a good fit. I knew Bob, a mission I cared about, something fractional, and we didn't exactly know what I was going to be doing other than when we got in, we started to figure it out a little bit more. And if I remember correctly, Bob, one of our first projects was that supplier pricing of starting to compare, wait, what are we paying? And is this the very best rate from the best supplier? And what does this actually look like? Can you walk us through sort of the first few months of our engagement of working together and kind of the problems that we were solving?
Yeah, that first year, I kind of just inherited a lot of processes, a lot of things that were going on, and you just had to take for granted that it was good enough. And I felt that, in order to scale and grow, there's two ways to do that. You can drive top line revenue, or you can improve your cost structure and reduce expenses. And so in order to hire additional people and continue to take things off my plate, you needed to do one or both of those things. And so one of the big pieces was really doing a supplier and pricing review to see where can we source all of our products, and then what are the costs and supply chain considerations in doing that. And so I think it was a pretty heavy lift for Jeff at the time, because one, he didn't know any of the chemicals that we use. It was quite the learning curve on both the chemistries, so really the product set, and then also the conventions. And we've got some really interesting conventions on the size of drums, and a lot of our products are liquid and they're sold in gallons, but they might also be sold in pounds. And so there was a lot of nuance that Jeff worked through in building out a spreadsheet, communicating with a number of different suppliers to see where do we have contingencies to be able to purchase things if we were in short supply from our primary supplier. And to some extent, talk through the relationship aspects to improve our pricing metrics. And so that was it was a heavy lift. It was, I think, probably a couple months in the working in order to put that together. But it was instrumental in freeing up capacity and costs to some extent, paying for that role. And so, yeah, that was one of the first things that Jeff worked on.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. It was new. Like I built organizations and I kind of knew, what to do. And there was lots I didn't understand and I didn't know. but it was really fun. I mean, pounds versus gallons. Did you know that different chemicals actually weigh vastly different things based on density? I hadn't thought about that stuff, cool, frankly. But putting together this and then talking to our suppliers, I mean, I enjoyed the work. I was popping into something new, took something immediately off of Bob's plate, gave him a little bit more capacity, even just to think like, what are our next kind of key strategic initiatives or goals that we want to do?
That's awesome. And so now, Jeff, I am going to, when we get off of here and we head down, I'm going to go tell my 17-year-old daughter that the chemistry she's currently studying, there is a real world application to it, and she should pay attention because you never know where you're going to end up.
We have recently hired a PhD in chemistry, and he is a godsend to us because we didn't have that expertise, and I'm certainly glad some people do. Otherwise, you would not have clean water. How about that?
Bob, how did you know it was working?
Yeah, I don't know that I had time to step back and reflect. I knew that, I was getting to do more of the things that I wanted to do, and Jeff was accomplishing things and getting things done. And so I've had very little time to reflect. Is Jeff worth, what we're paying him, and is he providing value? I think those were always a yes. So it made it an easy decision, and we've continued to move forward. His role has continued to shift. He's worked on various other projects. I would say there's two things that I most value about the working relationship I have with Jeff. One is the friendship, but he brings a strategic level to the table for us, right? He's a peer in terms of thinking about the business strategically. He cares about my heart and me as a person, and he asks really good questions about what my desires are, how that impacts my faith, how it impacts our employees. And so he's somebody just for me to bounce ideas off of and have a strategic mind next to me in guiding me along in decision making. And so that's been really, really valuable. And then I'd say the really big thing that he's brought to treatment tech is really implementing an operating system. And so we run loosely off of EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and he helped implement and bring that to the table. And then he continues to manage that process. I knew that we needed to bring structure into the business, and how to go about that I was unclear on. I was not familiar with EOS. I was familiar high level. I was aware of it. I had not read any of the books and or materials. And as Jeff and I started talking, I did read and learn more about the structure, and then he helped us bring and implement that. And then he coordinates on an ongoing basis our weekly team meeting. In fact, our first strategic retreat, it was just Jeff and I. We went to my place in the mountains for an evening, so 2 days, and we talked about, what do I want out of this business? What's our vision, strategic plan? What is the 3, 5, 10-year goals? And what do we want to be there? And then who do we want to be as a company? And then, we wrote down, what our values look like and a mission statement and all of that. And so that was really, really helpful in building a path that we've been able to follow. So that's how, I would say his role at Treatment Tech has shifted. It was blocking and tackling, helping free up capacity, and then it's moved into more strategic things.
Yeah, there's a couple things that you said there that really jumped out at me. I think some of the things that I heard through what you were saying is I think you got a partner who is working alongside of you, who is helping you through some of the various different phases of the business. But I'm also curious, maybe just double clicking down on what I heard you say at the beginning, which was as a CEO, you really sort of viewed your role in two areas, strategy and culture. So as Jeff sort of inserted in there, how did what he was doing allow you to fulfill that mission of focusing on strategy and culture?
Yeah, I think the first part was like freeing up time and capacity to think about those things and spend time there. So that was one. And then two was he was right alongside me in making those decisions. I've had a relationship with Jeff for a long time, so I can tell him no when he has an idea that I don't agree with, or that's not the direction I want the business to go. But I don't think most business owners or people in the C-suite have somebody right beside them to bounce a ton of ideas off of and discuss, and have somebody that thoughtfully challenges and or questions the premise and or how you want to go about something. And so I find that really helpful, right? So I know a lot of CEOs, a lot of business individuals that I can go to for tactical guidance and advice on various topics, but they don't have the time to think about my business holistically and or more broadly, right? So having Jeff work in the business, do various aspects of do various tasks or things within the business, he really understood the business, and then he got to know me at a much deeper level. And so he could ask questions on the strategic and operational level and cultural level that was really, really helpful. And then, I think one part that we haven't talked about that Jeff helps drive our human flourishing initiatives. And so he has a lot of background in what that looks like from a faith perspective from his time at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. And so I think, we have one of the foremost leaders in the country, if not globally, on how to integrate your faith and work and what that looks like in expressing that in caring for your employees. And so we've got an A player that's helping drive employee engagement and human flourishing.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, my role did shift. It was blocking and tackling, then kind of operating system. And then we decided within the first year, we're going to need a director of operations. There's so much stuff that needs to be built out in the business. And we brought on an incredible guy, Isaiah Hansen, who's now leading all of this work. And with that role shifting, he moved over there, and I've actually shifted a little bit more to strategy and the human flourishing side. But it kind of got us to that next stage. And Bob's been just an incredible leader just a growth leader in every way, of which the company is on a path to, significant growth and profitability, as well as just top line revenue and impact on our employees and communities in general. All right, we're just about done. Lessons learned. I mean, the audience would be those that are wanting to grow their business, and you did, choose to hire a fractional leader. Maybe we didn't talk about it in those terms at the beginning, but what are the lessons learned, particularly for those that might be considering how do they grow? Maybe I hire a fractional leader, maybe I don't. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think about my decision making, we've used a lot of fractional work, not just Jeff, right? So we outsourced IT, we had a bookkeeper, now we have a fractional controller, we still outsource web and SEO. And so I think that methodology is actually really, really helpful for small business owners. I don't think it's utilized as well as it should be. I think I've talked to a lot of my peers that say, well, I don't have the dollars to add a $40,000 bookkeeper or a $60,000, $80,000 controller or operations manager. And I think there are plenty of times where you can start to piece that together. I think that, I was fortunate that Jeff came along at the right time and had some capacity, and we already had a high level strategic relationship. I don't know that I would say I would have advised to hire somebody of Jeff's caliber at the time, but looking back, absolutely was the right decision. It was easy for me because I knew that he was highly competent and I could trust him to get a lot of stuff done and help us move the business forward. But I think the cost aspect is probably the biggest consideration. And on a fractional standpoint, it's just dipping your toe in the water, right? It's not a $40,000, $60,000, $80,000 decision day one. And you can start with, a handful of hours and or a day or whatever that looks like. So yeah, maybe I got lucky. Looking back, I would absolutely do that. Hire somebody that's high level as opposed to spending cheap dollars on, an online resource. We use Upworks for some of the things, but I think the strategic piece and someone highly competent that could do a lot of different things saved me a lot of time and headache.
Bob, I really appreciate you making the time. I know you're out of the office right now and just enjoying some downtime. So the fact that you chose to spend some of that with us and talk about your journey, I really appreciate it. Thanks again.
Yeah, I'm excited for you guys and what you guys are building at YOKE. I think that there's an absolute need for what you're doing, and I couldn't think of some better people that come alongside and help people grow their businesses.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bob.
Bob.